Well, one of Donald Trump's early executive orders was to declare that the drug cartels that are responsible for bringing so much mayhem to American cities, these drug cartels would be classified under the Department of Homeland Security as terrorist groups, which would be a legal change for them. They wouldn't be treated like criminals so much. They would be, there's a special legal category for terrorists similar to that of pirates. Basically, they're outside the law and you could shoot them on sight, deal with them like a terrorist. In recent weeks, Donald Trump has indeed started doing that. It's very interesting, and it seems to be all completely legal, despite friends of the cartels objecting. Yesterday, Donald Trump mused that he will quite shortly declare that Antifa is a terrorist group, which I think is literally its definition. There may be some problems with doing this in that Antifa is disaggregated. Antifa is in some ways like ISIS. I mean, there's lots of rogue cells and rogue actors. It'll be interesting to see how that is outlined in any executive order or order by the Department of Homeland Security. But I'll tell you this, you can see already Antifa thugs on the ground who know exactly who they are, who are now a little bit worried that they won't be dealing with Democrat-run local cities and their defunded police, but rather the strong arm of Donald Trump. But much more important than these street thugs, the financiers of Antifa must be panicking, because the only thing worse than being a terrorist is being a financier of terrorism. And we know historically that George Soros and other leftist billionaires have indeed funded Antifa as the street teams, the violent street gangs enforcing the narratives and the viewpoints of the left. We have Antifa in Canada. I think if I had to say where it's strongest, I would probably say Montreal, and again with the cooperation and toleration of the police. It's somewhat active in Toronto and Ottawa, our nation's capital. You don't see much of it in the West. There's some of it in Vancouver. But there is some in Toronto, and on the weekend they made their fangs seen. Joining us now to talk about what happened on Saturday in Toronto is Caryma Sa'd, a lawyer and independent journalist, a member of the Independent Press Gallery, who joins us now via Zoom. Caryma, great to see you. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. It's a pleasure to have you. You're always out there on the street. You and your cameraman seem to have a nose for news. You just know where things are going to be. And that place on Saturday was a place in Toronto called Christie Pits. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about the history of Christie Pits and what happened there on Saturday?
So it's a public park that itself is a historically significant backdrop, because in 1933, a riot broke out that was essentially, it happened during a baseball game, and there were Jewish and Italian immigrants fighting with members of swastika clubs, and it was an hours-long brawl. Police were heavily criticized for not doing much to prevent it, despite prior warning. And since then, Christie Pits has sort of carried that legacy, which has been, let's say, the imagery from it has been drawn on by local Antifa groups, with the Christie Pits Hardball League. It's three baseball bats pointing downwards in the same style as an Antifa arrow, and you know that's sort of the backdrop to what happened on Saturday, which was a rally held by Canada First, an anti-mass immigration rally. And in response to that, different groups planned counter-protests, including Antifa counter-protesters.
Now, did it get violent? Were there baseball bats that were wielded?
I did not see any baseball bats. You know, in the weeks leading up to the event, there were stickers indicating BYOB. It seems there were no bees to bring. So I thankfully, no violence of that nature. But there was nonetheless verbal and physical assaults. The Canada First group was outnumbered by a large margin, and they were encircled by counter protesters when they then moved to leave the park. Some counter protesters followed them down the street, down side streets, pushing, shoving, blocking, things of that nature.
It looks like police were fairly numerous. They had bike helmets, not riot helmets so much. It looks like they didn't let things get too out of hand. I'm going to say, if someone started swinging a baseball bat at people, I think the police would have been there very quickly, because that would be a very assault with a weapon, aggravated assault. You start hitting people with baseball bats, you could kill them or grievously injure them. It doesn't quite look like it got that bad. Am I correct?
I would agree with that. And in fact, I would say that there was a relatively short period of time where police didn't have a good handle on the situation, maybe 10 minutes or so going down Bloor Street. For the rest, police maintained a visible presence and more proactive than I've seen at other rallies in the past. The one point of criticism I might raise is, unlike other events where counter protesters and protesters are separated by barricades or are prevented from intermingling, that didn't happen here.
Hmm. Now you go to, as I mentioned at the top, you go to so many street events. Some are one-sided protests. A few of them are, as you mentioned, protesters generally separated by some physical barrier and by police. Is Antifa a real threat? You go to so many of these protests or rallies. Do you recognize the same people? Do you recognize an Antifa boss or organizer? I know you criticize the so-called Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which is actually funded by the Trudeau government and now the Carney government. Is Antifa a real force in the Greater Toronto Area, for example?
There is most definitely a movement that exists. I don't know that there is a leader as such. I think that they try to organize in a more flat structure, although there are people who have positions of maybe informally, but who are the organizers and so forth. And to your point, it's often, there's repetition in the characters who appear at different events, different parts of the city for different reasons. And that's part of what drew me into wanting to document Ontario's protest subculture, trying to understand how and why that is. So there is a real presence, and my general experience, I would say, at most protests is that most people are there in good faith. And it's the ones who have ulterior purposes, including the opportunity to hijack social justice causes or righteous anger for their own sort of personal ends, whether that's just catharsis, the sake of harassment for its own sake, or whatever the case may be. But it is here, it is real. And as far as the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is concerned, there is an Ontario court ruling that confirms that CON has assisted the Antifa movement, which has been violent, and there are individual players who can be connected to that organization. Although I do note that CON keeps its activists at arm's length.